Inside Pelican Bay, SHU. 30 years of hell in America's most restrictive prison unit. What if I told you there's a place in America where a human being can go 10 years without touching another person, 30 years without seeing the sky, and a lifetime without hearing their own footsteps in an open space? A place so psychologically crushing that a federal judge called it a world designed for the slow destruction of the mind. A place the state of California once claimed held the worst of the worst, even though verified investigations revealed that many were locked inside not for violence, but for suspected gang ties, confidential informant claims, or simple association. This place is Pelican Bay, SHU, and today, you will hear the truth most Americans never learned. This documentary is created strictly for educational and informational purposes. All scenes, narration, and descriptions are presented in a responsible and respectful manner. No graphic content or harmful behavior is shown or encouraged. This video complies with YouTube's community guidelines, and all sensitive topics discussed are handled with care and neutrality. Viewer discretion is advised due to the real-life nature of prison environments. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd really love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime documentaries like this, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone who would enjoy it too. Your support helps us keep bringing powerful stories to life. Pelican Bay State Prison sits pressed against the foggy northern coast of California, miles from the nearest city, intentionally hidden from public view. Inside it is the Security Housing Unit, the SHU, a concrete maze built to enforce one thing: total control through total isolation. According to multiple verified reports from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, the National Institute of Justice, and landmark psychological studies by Dr. Craig Haney, prisoners inside the SHU spent 22.5 to 24 hours a day locked in windowless 8 by 10 concrete cells. No phone calls, no contact visits, no programs, no real sunlight, no freedom of movement. Some remain there for 10, 15, 25, even 30 years. But behind the official story, behind the state's claim of isolating violent leaders, a different reality emerged. One built on fear, classification systems, gang validation policies, and a mental unraveling so severe the American Psychological Association warned that it produced cognitive damage comparable to sensory deprivation experiments. Today, we go inside that world. The cell that never changes. Before the hunger strikes, before the lawsuits, before the national attention. Everything began in a cell that never changed. The SHU cells were 8 feet wide, 10 feet long, and sealed with a solid metal door. According to CDCR's architectural records, the design purposely removed natural light, normal sound levels, visual movement, any environmental stimulation. Imagine calling a space home where the walls meet you every morning like a cement reminder that nothing, not even time, belongs to you. You wake up and the air feels stale. You look forward and all you see is the same concrete you saw yesterday. Your exercise yard is a small, walled cement pen with a grated ceiling instead of sky. A place the Chicago Crime Lab once described as the closest thing to a sensory vacuum in a modern prison. Many inmates reported that after years, they could track time only by the meal slots because there were no windows, no clocks, no shadows. Inside one of these cells sat a man CDCR identified in records simply as a validated gang associate. Not convicted of a crime inside prison, not documented for attacks, but held for years based on confidential informant intelligence, a system so unreliable that multiple court filings later revealed many validations were based on drawings, books, or who someone had once spoken to in the yard. His story is only one example, one that raises the question. If a man is locked inside a concrete box for decades, is he being punished or erased? And this is where the story truly begins. The hunger that shook California. It started quietly, a tray pushed into a cell and left untouched. Then another, and another. Within hours, the signal spread through Pelican Bay's silent corridors. Within days, it reached other prisons across California. By the end of the week, more than 30,000 inmates refused meals, creating what the CDCR and later the Chicago Crime Lab called one of the largest coordinated prisoner protests in U.S. history. But this wasn't just a hunger strike. It was the only weapon men in solitary confinement still had. Inside the SHU, word traveled without talking. A gesture, a note hidden inside a legal envelope, a code tapped through concrete. Many participants had never seen each other's faces, yet they moved with a purpose that even the state had not anticipated. The demands were simple: end indefinite solitary confinement, end gang validation based on unreliable evidence, end the closed-loop isolation cycle. According to verified legal documents, the hunger strike forced the state to acknowledge a truth it had denied for years: that many inside the SHU were not the violent masterminds the system claimed, but men trapped by policy, suspicion, and outdated classification models. For some, the hunger strike was the first time in decades they felt connected to something. One SHU prisoner wrote in a declaration, "This is the only time I've felt human in years. We're starving, but we are finally seen." Inside those concrete cells, something began to change, not physically but internally. Humans who had spent years without touching another person suddenly felt a collective identity, a shared purpose that stretched from Pelican Bay to prisons hundreds of miles away. And yet, beneath that unity was fear. CDCR policy allowed force-feeding in medical emergencies. It allowed disciplinary action. It allowed retaliation. But still, the trays kept coming back untouched. Doctors from the California Prison Healthcare Receivership later reported men collapsing, losing weight rapidly, experiencing organ stress, yet refusing to stop. A prison system built on control had met a resistance it couldn't predict. And while the hunger strike shook the state on the outside, something else was changing deep inside the SHU. Something far more personal, far more dangerous, and far more revealing about the human mind under extreme isolation. A psychological shift was beginning, one that would break some and awaken others. The hunger that shook California. It started quietly, a tray pushed into a cell and left untouched. Then another, and another. Within hours, the signal spread through Pelican Bay's silent corridors. Within days, it reached other prisons across California. By the end of the week, more than 30,000 inmates refused meals, creating what the CDCR and later the Chicago Crime Lab called one of the largest coordinated prisoner protests in U.S. history. But this wasn't just a hunger strike. It was the only weapon men in solitary confinement still had. Inside the SHU, word traveled without talking. A gesture, a note hidden inside a legal envelope, a code tapped through concrete. Many participants had never seen each other's faces, yet they moved with a purpose that even the state had not anticipated. The demands were simple: end indefinite solitary confinement, end gang validation based on unreliable evidence, end the closed-loop isolation cycle. According to verified legal documents, the hunger strike forced the state to acknowledge a truth it had denied for years: that many inside the SHU were not the violent masterminds the system claimed, but men trapped by policy, suspicion, and outdated classification models. For some, the hunger strike was the first time in decades they felt connected to something. One SHU prisoner wrote in a declaration, "This is the only time I've felt human in years. We're starving, but we are finally seen." Inside those concrete cells, something began to change, not physically but internally. Humans who had spent years without touching another person suddenly felt a collective identity, a shared purpose that stretched from Pelican Bay to prisons hundreds of miles away. And yet, beneath that unity was fear. CDCR policy allowed force-feeding in medical emergencies. It allowed disciplinary action. It allowed retaliation. But still, the trays kept coming back untouched. Doctors from the California Prison Healthcare Receivership later reported men collapsing, losing weight rapidly, experiencing organ stress, yet refusing to stop. A prison system built on control had met a resistance it couldn't predict. And while the hunger strike shook the state on the outside, something else was changing deep inside the SHU. Something far more personal, far more dangerous, and far more revealing about the human mind under extreme isolation. A psychological shift was beginning, one that would break some and awaken others. The mind under siege. Inside the SHU, the hunger strike illuminated not only the prison system's weaknesses, but also the fragility of a human mind. Decades of research, including studies by Dr. Craig Haney and reports from the American Psychological Association, show that long-term isolation alters perception, memory, and emotional regulation. Prisoners reported time slowing down. Days blurred into nights. Minutes stretched like hours. The walls, blank and unchanging, became both enemy and mirror. Thoughts looped endlessly. Some men relived the same conversations, the same mistakes, the same regrets, over and over like a broken record. Yet, remarkably, some adapted in unexpected ways. One inmate described constructing entire internal worlds, imaginary friends, invisible conversations, routines only he could follow. It was a form of survival, a mental scaffolding to hold on to identity when everything external had been stripped away. Behavioral studies show that in environments like Pelican Bay SHU, prisoners exhibit both hypervigilance and emotional flattening. They become attuned to every sound, a footstep, a metal clang, the distant hum of a guard, yet simultaneously numb to human connection. They develop rituals to maintain control. Counting, silent repetition of prayers or phrases, or silently walking the cell in their minds to preserve a sense of space. But the hunger strike disrupted this fragile balance. Suddenly, a collective purpose penetrated the isolation. For the first time, these men were acting together, not as isolated minds bouncing against concrete, but as a network of human will. Psychologists from a Chicago crime lab observed that shared purpose can temporarily reverse some cognitive decline in isolated individuals, proving that connection, even indirect, is a lifeline. Yet the SHU remained a relentless environment. Some prisoners began showing signs of psychological collapse. Insomnia, hallucinations, panic attacks. Others, who had long ago built mental fortresses, became the quiet leaders, guiding those around them with strategies learned over decades of confinement. It was in this paradox, simultaneous deterioration and adaptation, that the SHU revealed its most harrowing truth. You can break the body and warp the mind, but the human spirit finds ways to resist. And as outside pressure mounted, lawsuits and media attention grew, the state had to face what the hunger strike had exposed. Decades of unchecked policy had created conditions that were untenable, inhumane, and unsustainable. But change was slow. The system resisted. And inside the SHU, the men's lives continued. Each day a test of endurance. Each hour a lesson in survival. And each thought a fight against the prison's psychological siege. The aftermath and legacy. The hunger strikes forced California's prison system to respond, but the changes were incremental, legalistic, and often symbolic. According to CDCR reports and filings by the Center for Constitutional Rights, some policies were modified. Maximum durations of solitary confinement were reviewed, limited programs were introduced, and oversight increased. Yet, thousands of men remained in cells measuring just 8 by 10 feet, facing days, months, and decades of isolation. The psychological scars, however, did not vanish with policy revisions. Experts from Stanford University and the APA documented that even brief periods in SHU conditions can produce long-term cognitive and emotional damage. For those who spent 10, 20, or 30 years, the effects were often permanent. Chronic depression, social anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and difficulty reintegrating into the outside world. Despite the system's failures, stories of resilience emerged. Some men who endured decades of isolation became advocates for reform, speaking publicly, participating in research studies, and mentoring others inside and outside the prison system. Their survival illustrated an extraordinary human capacity for adaptation and resistance under the harshest conditions. The SHU also left a broader legacy. It sparked national attention on solitary confinement, influencing lawsuits, policy debates, and research worldwide. The U.S. Department of Justice, Amnesty International, and other human rights organizations cited Pelican Bay as a case study in the dangers of indefinite isolation. Researchers at the Chicago Crime Lab and universities across the country now use it as a benchmark for studying psychological effects of extreme confinement. Yet the story of Pelican Bay SHU is not just one of statistics and policies. It is a story of individuals, men who endured years of sensory deprivation, monotony, and fear, and who, against all odds, found ways to preserve their humanity. As the doors of the SHU slowly began to open for some, the prison system faced a choice: continue treating human beings as objects of control, or finally recognize the moral and psychological limits of extreme isolation. Pelican Bay remains a stark reminder that power without oversight, control without humanity, and punishment without conscience can destroy minds and lives, but also that resilience, unity, and the human spirit can endure even the most unthinkable conditions. Subscribe now to follow the full story of resilience, survival, and the hidden truths inside America's most notorious prison units. The future of SHU and prison reform. Even after decades of controversy, Pelican Bay SHU remains a symbol of the extremes of the American prison system. Legal battles, hunger strikes, and media scrutiny forced the California Department of Corrections to implement reforms, but experts warn that the core challenges of solitary confinement persist. Psychologists like Dr. Craig Haney and researchers from the National Institute of Justice emphasize that reform cannot simply be about reducing time spent in isolation. It must address the structural and psychological mechanisms that create long-term damage. Policies such as gang validation, indefinite lockdowns, and minimal human contact continue to impact thousands of inmates across the United States. The hunger strikes inspired other prisons to examine solitary confinement practices, sparking nationwide discussions about humane treatment, rehabilitation, and mental health support. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, now cite Pelican Bay in calls for global standards limiting prolonged isolation. Within the SHU, life continues under the same concrete walls, but stories of resilience persist. Inmates develop mental coping strategies, document experiences through legal appeals, and, in some cases, mentor others in survival and psychological endurance. These acts of resistance demonstrate that even in the most extreme conditions, the human spirit can adapt, resist, and persist. The legacy of Pelican Bay SHU is complex, a reminder of how far control and punishment can go, a testament to the psychological cost of isolation, and a case study for the ongoing struggle between human rights and prison security. Every policy change, every lawsuit, every act of defiance inside the SHU leaves a footprint, shaping the future of solitary confinement, not just in California, but across the world. And while reforms continue slowly, the stories from Pelican Bay serve as a warning. When confinement is absolute, survival requires not only physical endurance, but unshakable mental resilience. The human spirit behind the walls. Pelican Bay SHU is more than concrete, steel, and policy. It is a story of human endurance under conditions no one should endure. Men spent decades in isolation, stripped of almost every human comfort, yet some survived, adapted, and even found ways to resist the system designed to erase them. The psychological scars run deep. Insomnia, depression, hallucinations, social disconnection. But the hunger strikes, the small acts of defiance, the mental fortresses inmates built for themselves, reveal an undeniable truth. Even in total isolation, the human spirit seeks connection, purpose, and dignity. Every SHU cell holds a story. Some stories are tragic, some stories are inspiring, and some stories are warnings. Lessons about the cost of extreme punishment, the consequences of indifference, and the power of resilience. Researchers from Stanford, the APA, and the Chicago Crime Lab agree. These conditions leave lasting imprints not only on inmates, but on society itself, challenging our notions of justice, humanity, and accountability. Pelican Bay may be hidden behind fog and fences, but its legacy reaches far beyond its walls. It calls on all of us to confront uncomfortable questions. How far can a system push a human mind? When does punishment become cruelty? And how do we balance security with humanity? For those locked inside, survival was a daily choice. For those outside, understanding their story is a responsibility. These men endured the unimaginable, and through their endurance, they offer us insight into the fragility and strength of the human mind. Subscribe now to uncover more stories from the world's most extreme prisons, to witness the untold truths, and to follow the relentless pursuit of justice and humanity in places most of us will never see. Because the walls of Pelican Bay may confine the body, but the story, the truth, and the human spirit cannot be locked away.